The massive spaceship, Shadow Spear, hovered over the dead planet. Thick clouds covered the sky, hiding the sun. The land below was dry, cracked, and lifeless. Earth, a world that had once been full of power, now nothing more than dust and ruins. Commander Vek Zoran stood on the observation deck, staring at the planet below. He was a proud warrior of the Zaforian Empire, a race that had conquered many worlds. To him, Earth was just another dead world, another piece of history long forgotten. "Commander," a voice spoke behind him. It was Dr. Xelfar, the lead scientist. "Scanners show something unusual beneath the surface. There are structures, intact facilities, buried underground." Vek turned, interested. Not just ruins. No, something preserved. Xelfar's voice held hesitation. "There are also strange warnings written in multiple alien languages, including some we do not recognize." Vek smirked. "Warnings? From whom?" "The humans. They are long dead." Xelfar frowned but said nothing. He knew arguing with the commander was useless. "Prepare a landing team," Vek ordered. "We are going down." The descent. The landing ship touched down near a massive abandoned city. Buildings stood tall but broken, their metal frames rusted and covered in dust. Silence ruled the land. No wind, no movement, just emptiness. Vek stepped out first, his boots pressing into the cracked ground. His elite team of Zaforian soldiers followed, their weapons ready. Dr. Xelfar and his scientists carried scanners, searching for the hidden structures beneath them. After a few minutes, Xelfar's device beeped. "Commander, this way," he said, pointing toward a massive metallic entrance, half buried in rubble. The team cleared the debris and activated the old panel. With a deep rumbling sound, the doors slowly slid open. Cold air escaped from within, as if the facility had been sealed for centuries. Vek stepped inside first. The darkness swallowed them. The warning. Inside, the air was heavy. Dim red lights flickered along the walls, revealing long corridors covered in dust. They'd moved deeper, their footsteps echoing eerily. Then they saw it. A large stone tablet stood in the center of the chamber, covered in ancient writings. The words were written in many languages. Some Vek recognized, others he didn't. Dr. Xelfar stepped closer and read aloud. "To all who find this place, leave at once. Do not disturb what sleeps below. Do not wake them. If they rise, no empire will survive." Silence filled the room. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. Vek scoffed. "Empty threats. The humans lost their war. Their time is over." He turned to Xelfar. "Where is the main chamber?" Xelfar hesitated, then pointed ahead. "Beneath us, there is a massive facility below." Vek smiled. "Then we go deeper." The sleeping warriors. The team moved downward, entering an enormous underground chamber. Rows of massive pods lined the walls, stretching endlessly into the darkness. Vek stepped forward, wiping dust off one of the pods. Inside, a human warrior lay motionless, his face frozen in a deep, unnatural slumber. His body was wrapped in black battle armor, old yet unbroken. Dr. Xelfar checked his scanner. "These pods are still active. They are in some kind of deep stasis, but their bodies are intact. This is impossible." Vek laughed. "Impossible? No, this is opportunity. If we unlock their secrets, we may find a new weapon for the Zaforian Empire." Xelfar frowned. "Commander, the warning." "The warning means nothing," Vek interrupted. "Wake one." The scientist hesitated, but orders were orders. He pressed a few buttons on his scanner, sending a signal into the pod system. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the pod hissed. Mist escaped from its sides. A deep humming sound vibrated through the chamber. The locks unsealed. Inside, the warrior's eyes snapped open. They glowed with an unnatural light. The air grew heavier, as if something ancient and powerful had just awakened. Vec took a step back, his smirk fading. The warrior slowly turned his head, his gaze locking onto Vec. Then, in a deep, commanding voice, he spoke. "Who dares disturb the warriors of Earth?" The underground chamber fell silent. The warrior inside the pod had awakened. His glowing eyes scanned the room, landing on Commander Vec and his team. His breathing was slow and steady, but there was something in his expression, a calm, deadly awareness. No one moved. Vec tightened his grip on his weapon, but did not raise it. He had seen many warriors in his life, but something about this human felt different. Older, dangerous. Then the human spoke again, his voice low and controlled. "Who dares disturb the warriors of Earth?" The words sent a chill through Dr. Xelfar. The warning on the stone tablet suddenly felt very real. Vec stepped forward, forcing a smirk. "I am Commander Vec Zoran of the Zyphorian Empire. We are explorers. Your world is long dead." The human did not respond right away. He simply stared at Vec, unblinking. Then, very slowly, he moved. With a low hissing sound, the locks on his pod fully released. The human stepped out. His body was covered in black, battle-worn armor, old but unbroken. Strange symbols were carved into the chest plate, symbols none of the Zyphorians recognized. He was taller than they expected, stronger. He moved like a predator, each step slow and deliberate. Vec narrowed his eyes. "What is your name, warrior?" The human's gaze did not waver. "Captain Dorian Kane. A forgotten past." Dr. Xelfar checked his scanner, confused. There was no record of this man. "No data found," he muttered. "Strange. This should not be possible. A human from Earth's last war. But his existence is not in any historical files." Vec ignored him. "Captain Kane, your world is gone. Humanity lost. The Zyphorian Empire rules this galaxy now. If you wish to survive, you will answer my questions." For the first time, Kane's lips curled into a smirk. "Humanity lost." His voice was calm, almost amused. "Is that what they told you?" Vec's smirk faltered slightly. "It's a fact. Your species was wiped out centuries ago." Kane tilted his head slightly. "And yet, here I stand." Zelthar's stomach twisted. Something felt wrong. Very, very wrong. The first strike. A Zyphorian soldier stepped forward, his weapon raised. "Commander, he is unarmed. Allow me to subdue him." Vec considered it. The warrior did not seem afraid. He should be. He was surrounded, outnumbered, outmatched. "Do it," Vec ordered. The soldier lunged forward. And then, it happened. In the blink of an eye, Kane moved. Faster than any living thing should. He grabbed the soldier's wrist, twisted it, and snapped it with a sickening crack. The Zyphorian screamed, but before anyone could react, Kane grabbed him by the throat and slammed him into the ground, hard enough to leave a dent in the metal floor. Silence. The other soldiers raised their weapons, but Kane simply turned his head toward them. His eyes glowed brighter. The air grew heavy, as if an invisible force pressed down on everything. Vec took an unconscious step back. What was this? Then Kane spoke again. "You made a mistake. Something else is waking." Dr. Xelthar's scanner beeped wildly. His eyes widened in horror. "The other pods," he whispered. Vec turned sharply. Across the chamber, the other stasis pods were coming to life. Lights blinked, locks unsealed. Hissing sounds filled the air. More warriors were waking up. Not one, not 10, hundreds. Vec's heart pounded. He had made a terrible mistake. Then Captain Kane smiled, and he simply said, "Run." A deep mechanical hissing filled the underground chamber as more stasis pods unlocked. One by one, the ancient warriors of Earth began to wake. Vec's breathing grew unsteady. This was not how it was supposed to go. He had expected to find remnants of a dead civilization, fossils of a long-forgotten war. Not this. not living warriors who moved faster than Zephyrian elites. The air grew thick with tension. Kane stood in front of him, completely calm, his glowing eyes scanning the room. He was not afraid. If anything, he looked amused. Behind him, more warriors stepped out of their pods. The Zyphorian soldiers raised their weapons. Their hands were shaking. They were elite fighters, trained for war, but something about these humans felt wrong. Vec clenched his fists. Hold your fire. A single mistake could turn this into a bloodbath. They remember everything. Dr. Xelthar's hands trembled as he scanned the awakened warriors. His eyes widened in horror. "Commander," he whispered, "their vitals are perfect. No signs of age. No degradation." Vec frowned. "Explain." Xelthar swallowed hard. "It's impossible. These humans should be dead after so many centuries in stasis, but their bodies are intact. Their strength is off the charts." He looked up, voice shaking. "Commander, they are exactly as they were the day they went into stasis. They remember everything." Vec's grip tightened on his weapon. The closest warrior, a tall, dark-skinned man with a scar over one eye, cracked his knuckles and grinned. "So," he said, his voice deep and rough, "who woke us up?" Vec stepped forward, keeping his voice steady. "I am Commander Vec Zoran of the Zyphorian Empire." The warriors exchanged glances. Some of them laughed. Kane's smirk widened. "Zyphorian Empire, huh?" He looked around at the others. "Well, boys, looks like we slept through a little invasion." The scared warrior chuckled. "Doesn't matter. We're awake now." The realization. Vec's patience was wearing thin. Enough. He straightened his shoulders. The humans lost their war. Earth fell. "You are the last survivors of a broken species." Kane's expression did not change. Instead, he took a slow step forward. "Tell me something, Commander," Kane said, his voice low. "If Earth lost, why are you afraid?" Vec opened his mouth, but no words came out. Because he was afraid, and Kane could see it. Dr. Xelthar's voice interrupted. "Commander, we need to leave. Now." Vec turned sharply. "We are not running." "Sir, you don't understand." Xelthar's scanner beeped wildly. He pointed to the walls. "This facility, it's not just a stasis chamber." Vec narrowed his eyes. "Then what is it?" Xelthar took a shaky breath. "A military bunker." Silence. The meaning hit Vec like a punch to the gut. This was not a graveyard of the past. It was a hidden stronghold. And now it was fully operational. Too late. Vec turned back to Kane, but the human was already moving. Before anyone could react, Kane lunged forward. Vec barely had time to blink before a fist crashed into his chest plate. Cracky. The impact sent him flying backwards, slamming into the cold metal floor. His soldiers opened fire, but they never got the chance. The human warriors moved too fast. In seconds, the Zyphorian elites were disarmed and thrown to the ground. Their weapons clattered uselessly across the floor. Kane crouched next to Vec, watching as the commander struggled to breathe. "You came here thinking Earth was dead." Kane's voice was calm, but his eyes burned with something ancient. Something terrifying. He leaned in closer. "Earth was never dead. We were waiting." Vec tried to reach for his communicator, but Kane grabbed his wrist. The last thing the Zyphorian commander heard before darkness took him was Kane's voice, cold and final. "And now, the war begins again." A sharp ringing filled Vec's ears. His vision blurred as he tried to push himself off the cold metal floor. His chest armor was cracked where Kane's fist had struck. No one had ever hit him that hard before. His soldiers were on the ground, disarmed, beaten, defeated. The human warriors stood above them, moving with a predator's ease, completely in control. Vec gritted his teeth. This was impossible. Earth's warriors were supposed to be extinct. They were supposed to be relics of a lost war. But now, they were awake, and they were looking at him like hunters watching prey. The last warning. Kane stood over Vec, arms crossed. His eyes glowed faintly, but the smirk on his face was gone. "You don't belong here, Commander," Kane said. "We let your kind roam the galaxy while we slept. That was a mistake." Vec spat blood and glared up at him. "You think you can fight the Zyphorian Empire?" He let out a dry laugh. "Your world is gone. Your army is nothing but ghosts." Kane exchanged a glance with the scared warrior beside him. Then he crouched down, gripping Vec's throat with one hand, not tight enough to choke, but tight enough to remind him that he could. "You don't understand, do you?" Kane's voice was almost amused. "We are the last warriors of Earth, but we are not its only defenders." Vec's breathing slowed. "What are you talking about?" Kane leaned in. Earth was never unprotected. The activation code. Dr. Xelfar, still on the ground, fumbled with his scanner. His hands were shaking, but his mind was racing. He ran another scan of the facility, and what he saw made his blood run cold. "Commander," Xelfar whispered. Vec barely turned his head. Xelfar swallowed hard. "This bunker is connected to something bigger. The humans, they weren't just sleeping." He looked up, his face pale. They were waiting for a signal. Kane glanced at Xelfar, his smirk returning. "Smart guy. You're right." Vec's stomach twisted. "What signal?" Kane slowly stood up, raising his arm. His fingers tapped the side of his wrist armor, pressing a hidden activation code. A deep rumbling shook the entire bunker. The walls hummed with power. Then, from the surface above, a signal pulsed into the stars. A call to the sleeping giants. Far beyond Earth, hidden in the void of space, ancient human warships came to life. Massive battle stations, long forgotten by the galaxy, activated at once. Their systems, silent for centuries, now hummed with deadly power. On planets where humans had once built their last defenses, buried weapons emerged from the ground. The sleeping giants had awoken. And across the universe, scattered remnants of humanity, those who had survived in secret, saw the signal. It was a message, a declaration. Earth had returned, the nightmare of the Zyphorian Empire. Vec felt the vibrations beneath him, the hum of engines awakening, the distant echo of something vast, something terrifying, coming online. His heart pounded. No, this wasn't possible. Humanity was supposed to be dead. Their war was supposed to be over. But now, as Kane and his warriors watched him in silence, Vec realized the truth. The war had never ended. Humanity had never surrendered. They had simply waited. And now, their enemies would pay the price. Kane knelt beside Vec one last time, his voice quiet but deadly. "Run back to your empire, Commander. Tell them the truth." Vec clenched his fists. "And what truth is that?" Kane smiled. "That Earth just declared war." The underground bunker shook with raw energy. Vec struggled to stand, his armor dented, his pride shattered. The signal Kane had sent was already racing across the stars, activating something enormous, something the Zyphorian Empire had never anticipated. The human warriors stood tall, watching him with cold, unshaken confidence. They weren't afraid. Not of him. Not of his empire. And that terrified him more than anything. A desperate escape. Dr. Xelfar grabbed Vec's arm, his voice frantic. "Commander, we have to leave. Now." Vec snapped out of his daze, looking at his fallen soldiers. Some were still groaning, barely conscious. Others were too broken to move. His fists clenched. This mission was supposed to be an easy discovery, a historical expedition. But now, it had become a war zone. "Get the men to the ship," Vec growled. Xelfar didn't hesitate. He scrambled toward the exit, pulling a half-conscious soldier with him. Others followed, dragging their wounded away from the battlefield. Kane and his warriors made no move to stop them. They didn't have to. The message had been sent. The war had already begun. The throne of the Zephyrian Empire. Light years away, deep in the heart of the Zephyrian capital, Emperor Kravos sat upon his obsidian throne. His golden eyes narrowed as he watched the emergency transmission from Vex's shuttle. The feed was shaky, flickering with static, but the words came through clearly. Earth's warriors are alive. The royal advisors murmured in shock. The generals exchanged uneasy glances. The emperor did not move. Vex's voice continued, raw with urgency. We thought humanity was extinct. We were wrong. Their warriors survived, and they are waking up. A tense silence filled the chamber. Then Kravos finally spoke, his voice low and calculating. How many? Vex hesitated, and then he said the words that shook the entire empire. All of them. A ripple of dread spread through the room. The Zephyrians had spent centuries conquering worlds, wiping out weaker species, ruling with an iron grip. They had assumed humanity was just another casualty of war. They had never considered what would happen if the warriors of Earth returned. Kravos exhaled slowly, his fingers tapping against the armrest of his throne. Then he gave the order. Mobilize the fleet. The sky burns. As Vex's shuttle raced through the void, a distant light caught his attention. He turned toward the viewport, his breath catching in his throat. Something was happening near Earth. The darkness of space was no longer empty. Hundreds of colossal warships, human warships, emerged from the shadows, their engines glowing like silent beasts waking from hibernation. Their hulls bore the scars of ancient battles, but their weapons shined with renewed energy. The lost armada of Earth had returned. Vex felt something deep in his chest, something alien to him. Fear. Kane's last words echoed in his mind. Earth just declared war. And as the first human warship powered up its weapons, preparing to retake the galaxy, Vex finally understood the true nightmare. This war was never about survival. It was about revenge. The stars trembled as Earth's warships powered up, their ancient cannons humming with deadly energy. Vex's hands clenched into fists as he watched from his shuttle. This wasn't a lost civilization. It wasn't a forgotten species. It was a storm that had been waiting to strike. And now, it was here. The Zephyrian Empire reacts. The moment Emperor Kravos received Vex's full report, he stood from his throne. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with something dark. Deploy the Grand Armada. Every fleet, every warship. We will end this before it begins. The generals hesitated. They had conquered hundreds of worlds. No species had ever challenged them like this. One of the commanders stepped forward. Your Majesty, are they really that dangerous? Kravos turned slowly, his gaze cold. Do you know why we feared them? The room fell silent. Kravos took a slow breath. Because humans don't fight for conquest. His voice was almost a whisper. They fight for survival. And that makes them unstoppable. The command was given. The Zephyrian Empire would strike first. But deep down, even the Emperor knew it might already be too late. Earth's counterattack. As Vex's shuttle entered the outer rim of Zephyrian space, alarms blared. Hundreds of Zephyrian warships were preparing for a full-scale invasion. Fighters launched, weapons locked onto targets. But then, a ripple in space, a deep, low hum filled the void. And then, without warning, they arrived. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace. Their warships, ancient, powerful, hungry for battle, materialized like ghosts from a forgotten war. The Zephyrian fleet opened fire. But the humans were faster. The first human dreadnought unleashed a planet-cracking cannon blast. The Zephyrian ships in its path vanished in a storm of fire and debris. Vex's breath caught in his throat. This was not war. This was a massacre. The fear spreads. Across the galaxy, news of the human retaliation spread like wildfire. Governments panicked. Zephyrian-controlled planets began to question their loyalty. If humanity had truly returned, what did that mean for them? Rebellion whispers turned into battle cries. For the first time in centuries, the Zyphorian Empire felt fear. And deep in the throne room, Emperor Kravos watched in silence. His fingers curled against the armrest. His jaw clenched. He had underestimated them. Humanity was not just a survivor. It was a force of nature. Kravos exhaled, his voice low and unreadable. So, the gods of war have returned. He stood, turning toward his war council. Prepare the doomsday protocol. The room fell into stunned silence. One general hesitated. But, Your Majesty, if we use it. Kravos' gaze burned. Then we end Earth, once and for all. The final stand approaches. As human warships sliced through Zyphorian forces, Cain stood aboard his command ship, arms crossed. A message blinked on his console, an intercepted Zyphorian transmission. He read it, then smiled. They were preparing something desperate, something final. Cain turned to his crew, his voice calm. Let them try. The war for Earth had begun, and it would end with fire. The Zyphorian Empire's doomsday protocol was not a threat. It was a last resort. A weapon so powerful that it could reduce a planet to nothing but ashes. Emperor Kravos stood before the massive war table in his command center, the holograms flickering with real-time data. The human fleet had already decimated a significant portion of the Zyphorian forces, and the remaining fleets were on the verge of collapse. But Earth's warriors were not the only ones who knew what it meant to sacrifice everything for survival. Kravos turned to the War Council, his golden eyes blazing with determination. Activate the protocol, he ordered. His voice was steady, but beneath it lay an undeniable trace of fear. If we are to fall, we will take them down with us. A deadly choice. Deep in the heart of Earth's fleet, Cain stood with his arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold on the holographic map. The Zyphorian Empire was on the brink of collapse. But then, something changed. A massive surge of energy pulsed across space. Cain's eyes narrowed as he analyzed the data on his console. They've activated it. One of the officers next to him gasped. The Doomsday Protocol. They're preparing to destroy the entire planet. Cain remained calm, though the weight of the situation settled heavily on his shoulders. The Zyphorians had just announced their final move. Their arrogance knows no bounds, Cain muttered. He looked at his crew, his voice hard and unyielding. Prepare for the counterstrike. We're not just fighting to survive anymore. We're fighting for everything. The human counterattack. On Earth's surface, cities were in ruins, but humanity had never been more united. Even as their fleet battled in the void, everyone on the planet knew what was at stake. Across the globe, every defense network was activated. Hidden underground bunkers filled with ancient tech came online, deploying weapons that had been waiting for centuries. The human resistance wasn't just on the offensive. They were preparing to launch their counterattack. The Zyphorian warships above Earth had no idea that their time was running out. The Empire's last stand. Back in Zyphorian space, the Doomsday Protocol's countdown continued. Massive warheads powered up, their energy signatures lighting up the galaxy like a supernova. But Cain wasn't the only one who had been planning for this. The hidden fleet that had been waiting for centuries, buried under Earth's crust, was ready. The counterstrike began. The first wave of ancient human weapons shot across the sky, tearing through the Zyphorian battle lines. Warships were reduced to wreckage, drifting in the vacuum of space, their flames still burning in the emptiness. Cain's voice rang out over the comms, steady and commanding. This is humanity's final stand. Let them know that we are not their prey. The tipping point. The Doomsday Protocol was nearing its final stages. Zyphorian ships formed a massive barrier around their homeworld, preparing to launch their ultimate weapon. But they had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated Earth's warriors. Cain, aboard his flagship, maneuvered the human fleet into position. Deploy the EMP burst. We have one shot. A massive wave of electromagnetic energy cascaded through the Xiphorian defenses, crippling their warships. The Doomsday Protocol's core systems flickered, unable to withstand the pulse. As the human fleet moved in for the final blow, Kane spoke one last time, his voice cold and commanding. "This is the end of the Xiphorian Empire. The Empire falls. The battle above Earth reached its climax. The Xiphorian warships, once powerful and invincible, were now little more than floating debris in the wake of the human counterstrike. The final remnants of their fleet fell to the overwhelming power of Earth's warriors." As the last Xiphorian ship exploded into a ball of fire, Kravos watched from his command center, helpless. "We have failed." His voice was barely a whisper, the weight of his words crushing the last remnants of his empire. But even as the Xiphorian Empire crumbled, Kravos had no intention of going quietly. He activated the last fail-safe, a self-destruct mechanism built into the capital. The entire capital began to implode, sending shockwaves across space. A new dawn. As the debris of the last Xiphorian warships drifted into space, Earth's warriors stood victorious. Their ancient fleet had won. But Kane knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. "We've taken back our home," he said, staring out into the stars. "But the universe is vast, and the enemies of Earth will not forget this day." The human warriors began to regroup, their battle-worn faces showing no sign of fatigue. They had one goal now: to protect their home.